Hello everyone, from Karel and myself, and a warm welcome to our session at the Scottish Summit, titled 7 Habits Every Azure Admin Must Have. Let us first of all thank all organizers and everyone involved for setting up this event and for giving us the opportunity to deliver this talk. Of course, we also want to thank all sponsors because without them it would be quite impossible to set up an event like this, so thank you. In our session, we will first briefly discuss the responsibilities of the new Azure or Cloud Administrator role. It's a new IT role you now see a lot developing within many companies. Then we will talk about the 7 habits every one of those Azure admins, in our opinion, should have. We will also show some demos between the different habits, and completely at the end of the session, we will also go through the key takeaways to really focus on the things we think you should remember about our session. So before starting, let us introduce ourselves briefly. My name is Matthyssen. I live in Belgium, where I work as a cloud architect. Since last year, I'm awarded as a Microsoft MVP, which was and still is a great honor. Community-wise, I'm a founding board member of a Belgian user group called MC2MC. Next to that, I also have my own blog, https://matthyssen.com, where I blog a lot about my daily experiences with Azure and all Microsoft-related hybrid cloud services. And like most IT professionals these days, I'm also on Twitter. So if you ever want to reach out, ask a question, or just want to chat, you can always contact me through my Twitter handle, @Matthyssen. So I think that's me in a nutshell, and we'll now let Karel introduce himself.
Yeah, so hello everyone from my side. My name is Karel de Winter. I'm a cloud solution architect. I work for Dexmark, a company in Belgium also. Since last week, I'm official in Microsoft Azure MVP, so I'm really new in this MVP community and really excited to be part of it. I'm also a certified trainer and a member of the Tech9 user group. So that's another Belgium user group, and we are focusing on the IT pro side of things. If you want to reach out to me, the best way is via Twitter. So you can find my Twitter handle here.
So most of you will probably have started your IT career as a support engineer or as a system administrator at a company that used their own on-premise data center and infrastructure. And as an on-premise sysadmin, you are probably responsible for all IT matters within that data center. You only not needed to keep all servers up to date and do all the new server and application installations, but yeah, you probably also needed to do all cabling and racking and stacking of the servers. And next to that, probably you even needed to troubleshoot almost every IT problem. But in this modern hybrid cloud world, where the cloud is used in one way or another by almost every company, this sysadmin role will transform into something else. The role will sort of evolve into a cloud administrator role, or in case of Azure, to the Azure admin role. And for many people, this will sound like they're going to lose their job or that their role will become less important. But nothing could be furthermore from the truth. It will be more, the more that things change, the more that everything will remain the same. In their changed role as an Azure admin, they will still have responsibility for building, managing, protecting, automating, and even optimizing this new hybrid cloud or cloud-only environment. Just like they did before when they only worked on premises, because yeah, the cloud is really not going to run itself. Depending on which cloud service, it was clicked too far. Depending on which cloud service model you run your workloads, is it IaaS, PaaS, serverless, or SaaS, there will always be a shared responsibility where Microsoft will manage everything until a certain point, but you as the Azure admin will also have some responsibilities. This can be managing your IaaS VMs by providing them with Windows updates, antivirus, and backup, or only managing the databases and the data, for example, when you run Azure SQL databases. So let us now move on to discuss some of these habits that each of these Azure admins should have, in our opinion. So Karel will start with telling you everything about the first one.
Yeah, so for our first habit, if you want to manage and protect your Azure environment, so what tools do you need? And if you want to remain in control of your Azure environment, what do you need to remain in control of that? So if you are working with Azure, you should know that there is some kind of toolkit that you can use to manage the complete Azure environment. And let me tell you a story here. I once woke up the middle in the night and I realized that I had VMs running that were very expensive VMs. So it was in a test environment. I did not turn them off. So with one of those tools, that saved my life for that moment. So one tool that you all know is portal.azure.com. So it's the main entry point to manage your environment, but you also have the Portal app. You can download that. With the app, it's just the possibility to manage the portal without going to a browser. If you want to manage Active Directory itself, you can go to a specific Azure AD portal to just manage AD objects and not all the Azure resources. You can go to the preview.portal.azure.com to just have a look at your complete Azure environment, but also the preview features that are available in Azure. But be aware, if you use preview features, that is not supported by Microsoft. And the one that saved my life once is the mobile app. So you can just install the mobile app on your mobile phone and then use it wherever you are if you have internet access. So for that moment when I wake up in the night, I just took my mobile phone. I just went to the mobile app and did a shutdown of the VMs. So, okay, as you can see, there are other tools that Rambo would use. For example, the Cloud Shell. The Cloud Shell is a very powerful instrument that you have. You can go to shell.azure.com and then you have a complete Bash environment or PowerShell environment that you can use. It's not only Bash PowerShell, but you can also use Docker commands in it to just use that from the Cloud Shell and manage your complete Azure environment. The other tool that we have is the Storage Explorer. So with that, you can transfer files from your local workstation to a storage account, for example. We also have the Windows Admin Center. That's to manage your hybrid workload. So if you have on-prem servers and you have an Azure environment, you can use the Admin Center to not only manage your on-prem servers from that, but there is also a preview feature now in the Azure portal that you can go to the admin center there and then have management perspective there. One of my favorite tools is Visual Studio Code. If you're working with scripts or ARM templates or bicep files, you can use Visual Studio Code with the extensions on it and just edit the files. And there is also Windows Terminal that you can use, for example, to have to edit your favorite files, but you can have Cloud Shell in Windows Terminal also. Other portals that will come in very handy are these ones. So it's just a list that of URLs that we use a lot. I think the last one I've recently spotted, and it's very handy because all the different Microsoft portals are in that site. So if you go to msportals.io, you have a complete list of the active portals, but also the portals that are being deprecated. So definitely have a look at that link. Okay, what if you want to use those tools across multiple subscriptions? Well, for that, Azure Lighthouse brings you the capabilities of managing multiple subscriptions across multiple tenants. So it's actually based on delegating access to other users. So Azure Lighthouse will help you to manage other environments, whether you are an MSP or a very large enterprise that has multiple companies beneath with different subscriptions and so on and different tenants. You can use Lighthouse to manage the complete environment. Okay, Wim, let's talk about the next habit.
Okay, let me go to the second one. So in our second habit, we want to talk about how we can be future-proof by looking beyond IaaS, because where we're going, we don't need VMs. So when you think about migration to the cloud, the first thing you should consider is why you want to do that. So what do you want to achieve and what added value you want to achieve for your business? And before moving any on-premises workloads to the cloud, in our case, Azure, the second thing you need to think about is the assessment phase and how you will choose the right cloud migration approach to really make your cloud journey a success. You not only need to check if your business is ready to move to Azure, but you also, for example, need to validate if your IT people, the people that will manage your environment when it's migrated, have the right skills to support such an environment. Luckily, these days, the 5 R's can help you on your way and help you to choose the right plan to migrate your on-premise workload or applications into Azure. First of all, you have rehost, or like they say, lift and shift, where you simply pick up an on-premise service, is it physical or a VM, and just place it in Azure. You can also choose to refactor or re-architect, where you're kind of going to rethink your workload before moving to Azure. In this way, you can make it, for example, high available or more scalable. You can also revise or re-platform, like they say, your workload, where you migrate your on-premise workload to any kind of PaaS service. For example, you can migrate your SQL Server databases running on an on-premise VM to Azure SQL database or to an Azure SQL managed instance. Next to that, you can also completely rebuild or rewrite your applications if you have a lot of developers in-house, and by that making it more cloud native. And as a final option, you can also completely replace your application or workload with a SaaS application, which you just need to purchase. What we often see is that depending on who initiates the move, is it IT or is it a business, that different types of one of those 5 R's are used. When IT mostly initiates the migration, or for example, when it's a timeline-driven migration, like they say, we see a lot of lift and shift migrations as the first migration step. And mostly when the trigger comes from the business itself, you see more refactor, re-architect, or rebuild migration scenarios. Luckily, there are some resources that can help you choosing the right cloud migration approach. First of all, you have the Microsoft Cloud Adaption Framework, or CAF. It's a collection of documentation that provides you with implementation best practices and tools. If you're architecting your new workloads, the Azure Architect Center is also a good resource. Here you can find all kinds of implementation examples, which can guide and help you in making a good design decision. And of course, you can also use Azure Migrate, which is integrated in the Azure Portal, and you can use through Cloud Shell or whatever, and to start it. It's an Azure service which can help you not only in discovering and assessing, but also into migrating your on-premise workloads. I think it's a service Karel and myself use a lot during all kind of customer Azure migrations. And if you're still not sure how to get started with your cloud migration, you can always check out Azure Migration Program. Here you can find the right help by asking for guidance, or you can contact a specific migration partner. Another thing we also want to mention is that there is also a Microsoft Learn course available these days, which you can follow. It will help you to get familiar with, for example, the Azure landing architecture at enterprise scale, and all critical design areas to build, which you need to look at when you build and manage your Azure environment. When creating your design, you should always, like we said, and like the title mentions, try to look beyond just using IaaS VMs. You should try to use a more, like I say, a cloud optimized strategy. For this, you look you can look into containers, instances, AKS, app service, and or even Azure Functions as other compute options. And this instead of just deploying or lift and shift VMs. The flow chart you can see on the slide, and which can, you can also find it in the Azure Architect extension, like I mentioned before, can really help you to select the right candidate for any of your compute services. And when your first approach was lift and shift, you should always try to make it not the end state. For example, you can switch from an IaaS domain controller to Azure Domain Services, or when you're using an Azure IaaS file service, you can try to replace it with Azure Files. And yeah, a hot topic these days, if you're using Azure IaaS RES Server or even Citrix on Azure, you can replace it with Windows Virtual Desktop, VVD. Next to that, you can also look into replacing your IaaS DNS server with, for example, Azure DNS or even Azure DNS private zones. And the last one, for people still working with print servers, you can now use Universal Print to replace them. Universal Print is currently, just keep in mind that Universal Print is currently in a public preview, so it's not supported by Microsoft. But you can already test it out. So Karel, up to the third one.
Yeah, so let's dive a little bit deeper in how you should think about migrating things to Azure. So why do we need a migration strategy, and why is it so important to think ahead and look at all those possible solutions that we can use in Azure? So well, because migrating to the cloud all depends on the application landscape that you have. So you have to look at the current application that you want to move and see if you can rehost, refactor, or rebuild it like Wim said. And if we look at the possible solutions that we see that are much used these days, you have services like Azure Web Apps, just a PaaS service. If you want to migrate your IaaS server to a PaaS service. And you don't have to manage the underlying service anymore. Azure Web Apps has the auto scale functionality by default, so it's very good. But if your application can be containerized, then in Azure you have a very simple and quick solution to host containers in Azure, and that's the Azure container instances. And for that, so the container image you can store in, for example, the Azure Container Registry. It's like the Docker Hub, but on Azure, and from there you can pull your image into ACI, so the Azure Container Instances. If your application exists of different microservices or components, and you want to have auto scaling and all those advanced features in it, then you can use Azure Kubernetes service. It's also very hot lately. So the AKS service, it's a complete Kubernetes solution on Azure. But you only have to worry about how many nodes you want and how many nodes you need. And how big they need to be, so you don't have to manage the complete Kubernetes cluster manager. That is Microsoft that is handling that. So that's very a very big advantage. So, and if you want to have the advantages of a web app, but your application is containerized, then you can also run your container in a web app. You can, I think it's in preview, but you can even use Docker Compose if you have a multi-container application. So you can put them in multiple web apps if you want. Next thing I want to talk about is what we can do. We have different migration enablers, like we say. So Wim said Azure Migrate. Azure Migrate is a very powerful tool. It exists of a lot of different capabilities to assess, but also migrate your complete environment. We also have the Azure Migration Program. So it's a specific program from Microsoft where you can opt in, and Microsoft will help you on the migration if your environment is big enough. of course. And then there are tools like Azure Database Migration Service and Azure Data Migration Assistant. So those two tools, one is an Azure service, the other one is a tool that you can use to move your, for example, SQL workloads to a SQL on Azure service. And it's very good to know that those tools exist, because we use them a lot daily, mostly daily. And another tool that is unknown is the App Service Migration Assistant tool. So if you have an IIS server, you can just use that tool to move your IIS server to, for example, an Azure Web App. So the next thing I want to talk about is Azure Resource Graph. So you can, it's a very powerful tool also to query, explore, but also analyze and do an assessment of your complete Azure environment. And for example, you can also measure the impact when applying Azure policies. You can do that with Azure Resource Graph. On the next slide, we have provided some query examples. For example, give me all the VMs by a specific OS type, give me all the VMs by a specific location. But in fact, instead of showing you examples, let me just share my screen here. So as you can see now, I have the Azure Resource Graph Explorer opened in my Azure portal. You just can search for it in the above search bar. I have opened 3 queries already. The first one will give me an overview of all the resources that I have by name. So I will run that query. When that query has been run, you can see that there will be a list of all those resources that I have specified by name. You can also format the results, so it will be a little bit more readable. Another query that we can use is give me all the VMs by location. So I have 2 locations where I have deployed my VMs. And this one is very short, but very powerful. If you have to do an assessment of an Azure environment, this will come in very handy. You can just run this command, and this will give you a unique list of all the resources, the resource types that you have in your Azure environment. Okay, that was it for the demo.
Let me share my screen again. Here we go. Let me take the slide again. So habit number 4, Azure Cloud Spend. Which we want to talk about so you can remain informed and in control of your cloud costs. It all starts with choosing the right subscription type, and an important step in the design process, because there are all types of Azure subscriptions and they all have different rates, offers, and benefits. The ones we mostly see being used in companies are enterprise or Microsoft customer agreements or CSP subscriptions. When you're using one of those, the price for your Azure resources will be lower than when you're simply using a pay-as-you-go subscription. Next to that, you should also be aware of your other software licenses, like, for example, those for, let us say, SQL. Furthermore, you should know that when you have an AA or an MCI agreement, that you can set up an enterprise dev test subscriptions, where you get special rates for some servers like VMs and SQL databases. Also, keep in mind that some Azure servers are always free for use. Some of those have some limitations, but yeah, it's good to know and to look into. And for testing purposes, you should definitely look at Dev Test Labs and Azure Marketplace Test Drive. For people who don't know, Azure DevTabs does not have any additional cost to use the service. You simply pay for the VMs you use. And test drives, you can see them as ready-to-go environments that allow you to experience a product for free, and this without needing an Azure subscription. If you're running a lot of IaaS VMs, like in Belgium, for example, a lot of companies still do, then a good way to lower your VM's cost and to save money is by using reserved instances. Where you make a reservation of resources and capacity for either 1 or 3 years. And there is even a 5-year term available these days, but is only for HB v2 VMs. You also have the option to choose to pay the reservation up front or on a monthly base. And you should also be aware that those reserved VM instances are available for most VM sizes, but there are also some exceptions. Next to that, you can also combine it with the use of the hybrid use benefit, in which you will use your existing Windows or SQL licenses with software assurance. That's an important factor for your Azure VMs or SQL servers running in Azure. Important to know is that these days you can not only use those reservations for VMs, but also for SQL, Azure Managed Disks, and even Azure Blob Storage, like you can also see on the slide. There are still a lot of other ways to keep your costs down in Azure. First of all, always estimate your cost in advance before making any design. Before you can use the Azure pricing calculator and the total cost of ownership, or TCO calculator. TCO calculator is a tool to estimate cost savings, which you can realize by migrating your any of your on-premises workloads to Azure. And when you're working on your high level or even low level design, you should also keep an eye on design decisions which can impact costs. For example, a resource can cost less when deployed to a different region, or when you design to use GRS, it's more expensive than, for example, when you choose LRS. Next to that, you can also always delete all unused Azure resources. Things we see a lot in environments, that there are still unassociated public IP addresses running, or there are still unused storage accounts with even VM disk on it, for example. And another one is when you, for example, have VMs running that don't need to run 24/7, to try to start and stop them during non-working hours. You can use Azure shutdown directly from the VM blade for this, or you can try out the start-stop virtual machine during off-hour solution, which is available in Azure Automation. Azure also has a built-in free tool named Azure Cost Management, which can help you to monitor and manage your costs across all your clouds, even if you're using AWS. You can use it to do cost analysis and define cost alerts, which will inform you when your consumption reaches a given threshold. Next to Azure Cost Management, another way to control your costs is by using Azure Policy, where you can set up specific policies to implement a form of cost control, and which will help you to better guardrail your environment. For example, you can set up a policy which only allows the deployment of certain VM SKUs in your environment, or one that restricts the creation of public IPs, or that resources can only be deployed in certain regions like West Europe, and that deployments in all other regions are not allowed and blocked. But let me show this in a demo. Let me show my Azure screen. So this is my Azure portal. Let me go to policy. You can type it in the global search bar. You just open policy. And like you can see, when it's open, it will take its time. You can see I already have some policy assignments in place. Let me open this one. So for example, when I deploy an Azure VPN gateway, you can define specific scopes, which you can specify on management group level, or even on tenant, or on specific resource groups. This one is applied to a specific management group. And I just say I can't apply or install or configure or set up an Azure VPN gateway when I use the basic SKU. The one I want to go dig a little deeper into is the allowed locations. It's applied to also to my dev management group. If I click on it, it will open. If I click on edit assignment, and then if it's open, look into the parameters, you can see the allowed locations are West Europe. If I want to allow other regions, I just select them, review, and save them. This is a way to use policies, for example. Let us also quickly look into cost management. Just open cost management and billing from the sidebar. You can click on cost management. And on this screen, for people who don't know, you can do any cost analysis. Just click on the cost analysis. And a great addition to this blade, for example, is the advisor recommendations. So if there are any ways to reduce your costs, advisor will recommend such settings. So for example, if you have unassigned or unattached public IPs, it will guide you to inform you about it, or when you can lower your VMs to another size, which costs less, it will also inform you, or it will advise you to use reversed instances. Let us go back to the slides. So Karel, you can go ahead with the fifth one.
Yeah, I've seen that you have a budget of 200 euros. You're a rich man.
on a specific user group,
Okay, so for the next habit, we are using some free services. So when do you know when things go wrong or are going wrong in your Azure environment? We have experience, and those things happen. Those things can go wrong. So for that, you can use Azure Service Health. So it's a personalized view of the health of Azure services. So it's free, like I said, and you can be notified if there are some issues or if something is impacting your environment. And also you can see what's the health of the resources that you use. So you have 4 different service health events. You have the service issues, which informs you about your own Azure services. You can see when, for example, planned maintenance is going on for your VMs. You have the health advisors and also the security advisories. So good to know is that Service Health integrates with Azure Monitor also, and it can alert you via email, text message, or even a webhook notification. So the next is Azure Advisor. It's also a free service and will provide you with personalized recommendations and also best practices for your various subscriptions and all your resources. So those recommendations can then be customized so that only you see them, you see recommendations from your subscriptions or from that specific resource group that is most important to you. You can have recommendations for different types of resources also, like VMs, application gateways, SQL servers, app services, and so on. And those recommendations can be for costs, but also for security, reliability, performance, and operational excellence. So it delivers these recommendations by analyzing the underlying data, and that data it gets from Azure Monitor services, and it provides you based on that data those recommendations. So you can also use advisor alerts, but it's still in preview. But with that you can be notified when advisor alerts are triggered. And something new also is the advisor score. So the score is calculated between 0 and 100%. In each of those advisory categories. So a score of 100% means that all your resources are tracked by advisor and also follow the best practices. The score by 0 means that none of your resources follow the recommended best practices. So advisor is your personalized cloud consultant, and it's even free. So a good practice is to create service health and advisor alerts. So this will help you get informed about all service health events and also the advisor recommendations you want to be informed about. So this is really a very good tip. And it's you can get those alerts without opening the Azure portal. So later on, I will show you how Azure Service Health works. But the next free service is Security Center. It's your first thing to do when you need a security overview of your complete Azure environment. And it will give you also recommendations on how specific resources can improve security configuration. So there has been some changes about the naming conventions and so on. So as you know, Security Center is offered in a free, but also in a standard edition. So those 2 modes have come with another name. So Security Center Free, the free tier is Azure Defender Off, and the standard, so the paid edition, is the Azure Defender On. So Security Center without Azure Defender is enabled for free on all your Azure subscriptions. When you first visit the Security Center dashboard for the first time, you can just enable it. And the free mode includes a continuous assessment of your resources and also security recommendations. And you get also you get the secure score. That's also very important. Enabling Azure Defender, so the paid edition extends those capabilities of the free edition, and it detects but also protects your workloads against threats. And not only that, but it also provides you with a built-in protection for your hybrid cloud. So even if you have still an on-prem workload, you can also protect that. The last thing, something new, is the workflow automation. So that allows you to automatically react or trigger a specific workflow based on a certain condition. So, for example, an incident response or when a security recommendation is generated, you can act on that. So let's go back to service health. Let me share my screen, and I will show you how service health works. So if you can see my screen, you have those different events. So most important one is the health advisors. So Microsoft is giving those advisors for the complete Azure environment, not from your side, but the whole Azure environment. So you can have information, for example, a tracking ID, but also very important is which issue this is. For example, the Azure ARM PowerShell module is going to expire in 2024, so a very important action required here. So you have to change all your scripts by then. You have a little, but just be aware of that. But if you want to see your own advisories and your own health, you can go to resource health. Let me just filter on a specific resource type and a specific subscription. So within this subscription, I have different VMs. I have 2 VMs here that are having an issue. So let me click on that. And from here, we can see that the virtual machine has been stopped and deallocated. But I knew because I did it myself. And as you can read, it is an authorized user that has requested that. So it's still an issue, but from here you can then add health alerts and then trigger an email or trigger something else to get you informed. Okay, next is up to you, Wim.
Okay, let me share my screen again. And let me take control. Yep. So, 6th habit. Let us now look. We have to look into secure and hybrid network connectivity so that you remain secured when you connect to your Azure IaaS and other Azure resources. Like probably most of you know, the easiest way, but the least secure one to connect to an Azure VM is by using a public IP address of its PIP. In this way, you can connect to an IaaS VM through SSH on port 22 for a Linux VM or RDP on port 338 if it's a Windows VM. This way of connecting to an Azure VM is okay. We are using that VM for studying purposes or where you want to perform a quick test on a pre-prod or development VM. But you should never use it to connect to your VMs in any of your Azure production subscriptions. And this because when you connect to your Azure VMs in this way, one or both of those management ports will be widely opened on the internet. And by this, your VM can easily be attacked with not only brute force attacks, but also with pore scans and even zero-day exploits. Whenever you need to connect to your IaaS VM or other Azure resources in any of your production environments, you should do so through a hybrid and high secure connection like a point-to-site VPN, a site-to-site VPN, or an express route. A resource we still see a lot being used in production environments is a jump box or a jump host or jump server, like some people like to name it. You can see a jump box as a service control entry point in your Azure environment which is used to access other devices in a separated security zone or in one of the spokes, VNets, if you're working with a hub-spoke model. When you use just a jump box, it's best to enable JIT for it, so you can control access and reduce the attack surface to this jump box. JIT is available when you use the Azure Defender On tier in Azure Security Center, so definitely take a look at that one. These days, you can also use Azure Bastion to securely connect to your Azure VMs. Azure Bastion is a PaaS service that you provision inside your virtual network, and it provides secure and seamless RDP SSH connectivity to your virtual machines, and this directly from the Azure Portal over SSL. How does it work? Bastion lives its own subnet. It's called the Azure Bastion subnet in your VNet, and which exposes only port 443, like you can see on the slide, to the internet. And then through your Bastion host, you connect with RDP 2389 or SSH on port 22, and this on the private IP address of your VMs. And in this way, the VM itself doesn't need a public IP. But let me demo this. So let me go back to my portal. So I already deployed a Bastion host. I deployed it in my hub spoke. These days, you can even use VNet peering. So you only need to deploy the Bastion host in your hub, and you can connect it to all your spoke VNets. I have some VMs running in my environments. I have some VMs running in my production spoke or in my dev spoke and so on. So let me take control of this VM through Bastion. So just click on the VM, click on connect, click on Bastion. The nice thing is you can combine Bastion with JIT. This VM is protected by JIT. If you need to request access, you need to go one step back because it's still not integrated in the Bastion blade. You open the VM again, you click on connect, you click on RDP, and then you request access. So we just request access, it will open, it will take around a minute for the request is in place. Then, oh, I clicked one too far. Then you just click connect again, you click on Bastion, you click on use Bastion, and then you can simply click in your username. So in my case, it's locadmin. If it's typing, it's hanging. Oh, I was switching from screens. Just type in your super secret password. And then you just click on connect, but probably the JIT is still in progress, so it probably will not be allowed. Oh, it's already there. Just click on allow, and you can see you can simply use your VM directly from your portal. And you can do whatever your things you want to do and manage from over here. So let me go back to my slides. Let me take control. So we have one final habit to talk about. And this is our last habit. We want to look into how you can secure your cloud identities and foresee a good cloud identity and management strategy. So the question, of course, is why protecting your identity is so important these days? Well, because there are all kinds of Azure threats where attackers may use existing techniques like ransomware, a kind of malware which encrypts a company's files or data, or social engineering, where an attacker tries to manipulate someone to give up confidential or important information. But yeah, these days there are also other and newer techniques that hackers use, like, for example, acquiring Azure tenant keys from GitHub, or for people who run a web server on an Azure IaaS VM, and that server is breached, then the attacker or hacker can use that VM to install crypto mining malware and use it for crypto mining, currency mining, for example. So as an Azure admin these days, you should always implement a zero trust model. And by applying a zero trust model, you never assume trust, but instead you continue to validate trust. And this means that you only grant access to resources based on verifiable user and device trust claims. And in this way, a trust is no longer assumed just based on the location inside of your organization's perimeter, but also from outside. So there are some resources and tools that can help you in protecting your Azure identities. First of all, you have role-based access control, which can help you to control who can access, edit, modify, or delete Azure resources based on the least privileged access model. You can also use PIM, or Privileged Identity Management, which is a service that enables on-demand, just-in-time administrative access to any of your Microsoft Online services. Another tool you can use is Azure AD Conditional Access. Conditional Access is an Azure Active Directory tool that you can use to manage and control access to all your corporate resources if they're running on-prem or in Azure. And another tool you also can use is Azure AD Identity Protection. With these tools, which requires an Azure AD Premium P2 license or an Enterprise Mobility and Security E5 license, is solely focused on risk regarding the compromise of user accounts. For example, it includes suspicious sign-in attempts. So its sole purpose is to really help you protect your users. There are also some other ways to secure identities. You can limit the use of global administrators. A best practice is to minimize this number of global admins to 2 or maximum 4 people in your organization. You should always enable MFA, which you can now enable for free, and this to increase your account security by requiring multiple forms of verification, and this to prove a user's identity whenever he signs into any of your applications. And next to that, but what if MFA malfunctions, for example, and you're not able to log in to, for example, the Azure Portal, or you're completely locked out of your Azure AD organization because you can't sign in anymore with your administrative accounts? To solve this, you should create 2 or maximum 3 emergency access, or like they say, break glass accounts. And yeah, I think there are a lot of more ways to secure your identities, but I think we can fill a complete other session with those. So, like you can see, managing identity security in your Azure environments can be a big and challenging job. Luckily, you can now simply enable Azure AD security defaults, which really makes it easier to help protect from identity-related attacks. And this with pre-configured settings recommended by Microsoft. The only thing you should keep in mind is if you're already using conditional access and you already have some conditional access policies in place, security defaults won't be available for you. So this is the end of our session, but before closing off our session, I would like to give you our 4 key takeaways, the things we think you should really remember out our session. First of all, now it's really time to modernize your workloads. So when you migrate your on-premise workloads to Azure, try to think beyond EAS VMs. Always keep an eye on your cloud sync because someone always has to pay the Azure bill at the end of the month. Also, make sure to use all free built-in Azure services and tools like Azure Service Health, Azure Advisor, Azure Security Center, the free tier then, and Azure Cost Management. Which all can help you to better manage and protect your Azure environment or environments. And last but not least, know that identity is a new security perimeter, so you should really try to secure all of your cloud identities. So, and with this being said, there only rests us to thank you for following our session. So if you want to reach out, our Twitter handles are on the last slides. And so thank you for both of us.
Yep, thank you. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.